There is a place where hope was not just forgotten, it was twisted, warped into something unspeakable. A place where new life was the greatest curse of all. Hello, and welcome to Deadform Stories. If you're listening now, you've chosen to step into the shadows with us, to explore the tales that whisper from the cracks in the world. If you dare to face these horrors, then we invite you to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Join our community of the brave and the curious. But be warned, some stories, once heard, can never be forgotten. Tonight's story comes from a sealed file. A file stamped with a single chilling word, Ravenwood. It is the story of a woman named Eliza Vane and the terrible truth of the cursed womb. Eliza Vane wanted a child more than anything in the world. She and her husband Thomas had tried for years. Doctors found nothing wrong. They called it unexplained, a sterile medical term for a profound personal grief. Their large, quiet house in the country echoed with the silence of the child they did not have. Then, one rainy afternoon, Eliza found a letter. It was tucked inside an old medical journal she'd bought from a dusty antique store. The journal itself was unremarkable, but the letter was a plea. It was written in a frantic, spidery script. The ink was faded to a rusty brown. It spoke of a place called the Ravenwood Asylum for women. It claimed the doctors there had found a way, a miracle, a treatment for the barren womb. The writer, a woman who signed only as M, begged anyone reading to stay away, to never seek out Ravenwood. The final line was etched deep into the paper, as if carved with the tip of the pen. It read, "They do not grant life, they only transfer the curse." Thomas dismissed it. "The ramblings of a disturbed mind," he said. But the words clung to Eliza. A miracle. They echoed in the silent halls of her home. They whispered to her in her dreams. Against her husband's better judgment, and driven by a desperation that eclipsed her fear, she began to search. Ravenwood Asylum had no website, no listed phone number. It was a ghost in the official records, but she found whispers on forgotten forums and in archived newspaper clippings. It had been a private, isolated institution, shut down abruptly in the 1950s. The reasons were murky: a fire, a scandal. The land, it was said, was reclaimed by the dense woods of upstate New York, abandoned to time. She found a name: Dr. Alistair Finch, the director of Ravenwood. In a single grainy photograph, he stood before the asylum's imposing gate. A tall, severe man with eyes that seemed to look right through the camera, through the decades, right at her. Eliza took this as a sign. She convinced Thomas they had to try. It was a long drive. The roads narrowed. The modern world fell away. The trees here were ancient. Their gnarled branches wove a canopy that choked out the sun. The air grew cold. The GPS died. They navigated by a hand-drawn map Eliza had pieced together from her research. The final turn was onto a dirt track, nearly invisible behind a wall of thorny undergrowth. The car bounced over ruts, the sound of scraping branches like nails on a chalkboard. And then they saw it, Ravenwood. It was a monstrosity of brick and wrought iron, a Victorian nightmare jutting from the earth. Most of the windows were boarded over. Those that weren't were shattered, like broken teeth in a gaping mouth. The central tower leaned precariously, as if the entire structure was slowly sinking into the ground. The air was thick with the smell of damp rot and something else, something metallic, like old blood. Thomas gripped the steering wheel. "Eliza, we should go back. This is a mistake." But her eyes were fixed on the massive rusted gate. It hung open, just enough for a person to slip through. An invitation or a warning. She got out of the car. The silence was absolute. No bird song, no wind, just the oppressive, waiting quiet. She walked toward the gate. Thomas followed, his footsteps unnaturally loud on the gravel. The main doors were oak, swollen and warped with moisture. One was ajar. With a shove from Thomas, it groaned open, revealing a cavernous foyer. Dust motes danced in the few slivers of light that pierced the gloom. The floor was a chessboard of black and white tiles, now cracked and caked with grime. A grand staircase swept upwards, its mahogany banisters scarred and splintered. To the left, a massive reception desk stood like a tombstone, and the smell, it was stronger here, that coppery tang, now mixed with the cloying sweetness of decay. It was the smell of a place that had never been cleaned, a place where things had been left to fester. Hello? Eliza's voice was small, swallowed by the immense space. There was no echo. The sound just died. From the shadows behind the desk, a figure emerged. A man. He was small, stooped, dressed in a caretaker's uniform that was decades out of date. His face was a roadmap of wrinkles, his eyes pale and milky. He held a large iron ring, heavy with keys. "You are the Vane couple," he said. It wasn't a question. His voice was the sound of dry leaves skittering across stone. "The doctor is expecting you." He turned without another word and shuffled down a dark corridor. They had no choice but to follow. He led them through a labyrinth of hallways. The walls were painted a sickly, peeling green. Faded numbers marked the heavy metal doors they passed. Some were shut tight, others stood slightly ajar, revealing glimpses of tiny, cell-like rooms. A rusted bed frame, a porcelain sink stained brown, a shred of moth-eaten fabric that might have once been a straitjacket. They passed a common room. The furniture was overturned. A layer of dust covered everything. But on one small table, a single dusty teacup sat perfectly upright, as if someone had just finished their drink and left in a hurry. The caretaker, who never gave his name, stopped before a large, polished door. It was strikingly out of place. He unlocked it with a definitive clunk and gestured for them to enter. The office was an island of preserved opulence. Rich, dark wood paneling, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a large leather-topped desk, and behind it, sitting in a high-backed chair, was Dr. Alistair Finch. He looked exactly like his photograph, the same severe face, the same piercing eyes. He was impossibly old. His skin was parchment thin, stretched tight over sharp cheekbones, but his gaze was sharp, intelligent, alive. "Mrs. Vane, Mr. Vane," his voice was smooth, cultured, a voice from another era. "I have been reviewing your case, a tragic story. The unfulfilled yearning for creation." He steepled his fingers. "Ravenwood was founded on a singular principle, that the female reproductive system is not merely biological. It is a conduit for energy, for spirit, for life itself. When it is barren, it is not broken. It is empty, waiting." He stood and walked to a glass-fronted cabinet. Inside were rows of strange, archaic medical instruments, things that looked more like tools of torture. "Our treatment is unorthodox, but it has a 100% success rate. You will conceive, Mrs. Vane. I can promise you that." Thomas shifted uncomfortably. "What exactly is this treatment, Doctor?" Dr. Finch turned, a faint, cold smile on his lips. "A realignment. We simply fill the empty vessel. We use a proprietary serum derived from unique organic sources." He opened a drawer in his desk and truchewed a single sheet of yellowed paper, a consent form. "The process is simple. One night of observation here, a single injection. Then you may return home. You will know within a week if it has been successful." Eliza's heart hammered against her ribs. It was too good to be true. It was everything she'd been warned about, but the word miracle drowned out the word curse. She took the pen, she signed her name. They were led to a room on the 3rd floor. It was less a hospital room and more a Spartan bedroom. A single bed with a thin gray mattress, a wooden chair, a small barred window looking out over the decaying grounds. The caretaker told them the doctor would perform the procedure at midnight. Then he left, locking the door behind him. The click of the lock was final, a prison door closing. The hours dragged. The asylum was not silent at night. It spoke, a drip of water from somewhere deep within the walls, a faint, rhythmic scratching. Once they heard what sounded like a woman's sobbing, the sound seeming to drift through the ventilation grates. It was distant, hopeless. Thomas paced. "This is insane, Eliza. We need to leave. Now." But it was too late. The door unlocked at exactly midnight. Dr. Finch stood there, holding a small silver tray. On it was a syringe. The liquid inside was not clear. It was a dark, murky amber. It seemed to swirl with a faint, internal light. It pulsed, slowly like a sleeping heartbeat. "Please, lie down, Mrs. Vane." His voice was hypnotic. Eliza obeyed, lying back on the thin mattress. Thomas stood by the door, his face a mask of anxiety. The doctor swabbed a spot on her arm with an old-fashioned, pungent alcohol wipe. The air grew cold. Eliza felt a presence in the room, something old and heavy. It pressed down on her chest. She couldn't move. She couldn't speak. She could only watch as Dr. Finch brought the needle to her skin. "Do not be afraid," he whispered, his eyes gleaming in the low light. "You are not receiving a drug. You are receiving a legacy." He inserted the needle. The moment the plunger was depressed, Eliza felt it. A cold fire spread up her arm. It wasn't painful. It was invasive. It felt like something was crawling through her veins, something alive. And then a sound filled the room. A low, guttural, rhythmic thumping. It wasn't a heartbeat. It was slower, deeper. It was the sound of a massive, ancient drum. The sound seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, from the very floor. Thomas heard it too. His eyes were wide with terror. Dr. Finch simply smiled. "The house always acknowledges a new conception," he said softly. The sound faded. The presence lifted. Dr. Finch withdrew the needle. "It is done. You may rest until morning. Then you are free to go." He left as quietly as he came. The lock clicked again. Eliza sat up, shivering. She felt different. There was a new weight inside her, a low, deep hum in her core. She placed a hand on her lower abdomen. It was warm, warmer than it should be. She looked at Thomas. His face was pale. "What was that sound, Eliza?" She had no answer. They spent the rest of the night huddled together on the bed, listening to the asylum breathe around them. The next morning, the caretaker returned. He led them out without a word. The sunlight outside felt weak, unreal. The drive home was silent. Thomas kept glancing at her, his questions hanging in the air between them. Eliza just stared out the window. She could still feel the warmth in her belly, the hum. A week later, she took a pregnancy test. It was positive. She wept with joy. Thomas, while relieved, could not shake the memory of Ravenwood. The feeling of dread was a seed planted deep inside him, right alongside the new life growing in his wife. The pregnancy progressed with unnatural speed. Within a month, Eliza looked 4 months pregnant. Within 2, she was as large as a full-term mother. The doctors they saw in the city were baffled. All their tests came back normal. The baby was healthy, thriving, they said. But they couldn't explain the rapid growth or the other peculiarities. Eliza's senses became painfully acute. She could hear conversations from 3 rooms away. She could smell the sickness in a person from across the street. And her cravings, they were not for food. She developed a strange attraction to cold, hard objects. One afternoon, Thomas found her in the nursery, sucking on a small, smooth stone from the garden. Her eyes were distant, unfocused. "It tastes calm," she whispered. Then the dreams started, vivid, terrifying dreams. She was wandering the halls of Ravenwood, but it was not abandoned. The rooms were occupied. Women, pale and spectral, lay on the beds. Their stomachs were grotesquely distended, moving and shifting as if something inside was trying to claw its way out. And in every dream, she would find herself in a basement she had never seen. A long, tiled corridor lined with small metal doors, like an industrial freezer. From behind one of the doors, she would hear a soft, wet chewing sound and a baby's cry that was not a cry of distress, but one of hunger. She woke from these dreams gasping, her own enlarged belly tight and hard. She began to feel movement, but it wasn't the gentle fluttering the books described. It was violent, agitated. It felt less like kicks and more like scraping. One night, as Thomas rested his hand on her stomach, he jerked it back with a gasp. "It felt sharp," he said, his voice trembling, "like little bones." Desperate for answers, Thomas began his own deep dive into Ravenwood. He uncovered more than Eliza had. He found a name linked to the asylum's closure, not a fire, not a scandal, a containment breach. And he found references to Dr. Finch's research. His life's work was titled Transference of Primordial Resonance. It theorized that the trauma and essence of one being could be transferred to another through a specific biological vector, the womb. Eliza was now now 8 months along by conventional timing, but looked ready to give birth to twins. The movement inside her was constant, a squirming, churning agitation. She could no longer sleep. She would sit in the nursery they had painted a soft yellow, rocking in the chair, and feel the thing inside her turn. She started talking to it, singing to it. One lullaby, an old folk tune her grandmother had taught her, seemed to calm the frantic movements. For a few minutes, there would be peace. Then, one evening, as she hummed the tune, a different sound answered her. A tiny, high-pitched voice, humming the same melody back to her. It came from inside her own body. She screamed. Thomas came running. She was sobbing, pointing at her stomach. "It's learning," she choked out. "It's learning my voice." The horror was no longer abstract. It was in the room with them. It was part of her. Thomas, driven by a final desperate hope, decided to return to Ravenwood alone. He had to confront Finch. He had to find a way to reverse this. He left Eliza with a friend, promising to be back by morning. The drive to the asylum was even more foreboding the second time. The woods seemed to press in closer. The sky was a bruised purple. When he arrived, the main gate was chained shut. The chain was new, the padlock thick and heavy. He had to climb the high iron fence, cutting his hands on the rusted spikes at the top. The asylum was darker, more menacing than he remembered. The front door was now boarded up. He found a broken window around the back and climbed through into a kitchen area. The place was a wreck. Overturned pots, their contents petrified into a black sludge. He pulled out his phone, using the flashlight to cut through the gloom. He had to find Finch's office. He had to find answers. The halls were a maze of shadows. His light bounced off the peeling walls, creating shifting, monstrous shapes. He heard things, a dragging sound, a wet, gurgling breath. He told himself it was the wind, the settling of an old building. He didn't believe it. He found the polished door to Finch's office. It was unlocked. The office was exactly as they had left it, neat, orderly, but the air was frigid. Thomas went to the desk, frantically pulling open drawers. He found files, dozens of them, each one with a woman's name. Eliza Vane's was on top. He opened it. Inside were her initial inquiry letter, the consent form she signed, and a series of progress notes in Finch's elegant script. He read them, his blood running cold.
Subject Vane has accepted the resonance. Host body shows excellent compatibility. No signs of rejection. Fetal acceleration is within projected parameters. The transfer is successful. Subject reports auditory feedback, a positive sign of cognitive assimilation. The legacy of Subject M, the Weaver, is integrating seamlessly. The cycle continues. Subject M, the letter. They only transfer the curse. Thomas's hands shook. He kept reading, his eyes scanning the cramped writing. At the bottom of the file was a final note, dated just a week ago. The Vane gestation nears completion. The Weaver's essence has fully imprinted on the new host. Upon parturition, the primary subject will be harvested for further study. The offspring will be secured in the lower sanctum for maturation. Another perfect vessel, another link in the chain. The work of Ravenwood endures. Harvested, secured, maturation? The words echoed in Thomas's mind. This was not a miracle, it was a farm. They weren't creating babies, they were growing something and using the women as incubators. He had to get back to Eliza. Now, as he turned to leave, a floorboard creaked behind him. He spun around, flashlight beam darting across the room. Dr. Finch stood in the doorway. He wasn't alone. The milky-eyed caretaker was with him, holding a long, wicked-looking scalpel. "Mr. Vane," Finch said, his voice still smooth, but now with an edge of cold amusement. "You are early for the harvest." Thomas backed away, his heart a frantic drum in his chest. "What did you do to her? What is inside my wife?" Finch took a step forward. "Your wife is a garden, Mr. Vane. We simply planted a seed, a very, very old seed. The women who came here were not just infertile. They were empty vessels, perfect for holding the echoes of the women who came before them, the angry ones, the sorrowful ones, the ones whose pain was so great it could not be allowed to die." He gestured around the room. Ravenwood was never an asylum. It was an archive, a library of suffering, and every child born here is a living book, a record of a tormented life. The caretaker lunged. Thomas was quicker. He threw a heavy book from the desk, catching the old man in the face. He heard a sickening crunch. He didn't wait. He bolted past Finch, out the door and into the dark hallway. He ran, his breath sobbing in his throat. He could hear Finch's calm footsteps behind him. "There is no point in running, Mr. Vane. The legacy must be protected." Thomas didn't know where he was going. He took turns at random, his flashlight beam jerking wildly. He found a staircase leading down. Deeper. The air grew colder, damp. The walls here were bare concrete, sweating with moisture. He was in the basement, and he recognized it from Eliza's descriptions of her dreams. The long, tiled corridor, the small metal doors, the lower sanctum. A wave of nausea hit him. He had to see. He had to know. He walked slowly down the corridor, the sound of his own footsteps muffled by the thick, foul air. He stopped before one of the metal doors. It had a small, frozen-over window. He wiped the frost away with his sleeve, and he looked inside. It was a small, cell-like room, and in the corner, huddled under a thin blanket, was a child. It looked to be about 3 years old. It was pale, its hair thin and wispy. It was rocking back and forth, humming a tuneless, discordant melody. Then it turned its head. Its eyes were not the eyes of a child. They were ancient, filled with a bottomless, weary hatred. It looked directly at Thomas, and it smiled. A smile that held too many teeth. From behind another door, he heard the wet, chewing sound from Eliza's dream, and from another, a low, guttural growl. These were not children. They were the legacies, the echoes, the cursed offspring of Ravenwood, kept here to mature. Thomas stumbled back, a scream trapped in his throat. He turned and ran, blind with terror. He found another staircase, bursting out into the night air. He didn't stop. He climbed the fence, tearing his clothes, and scrambled into his car. He sped down the dirt road. The image of that child's smile burned into his mind. He called Eliza's phone. No answer. He called her friend's house. The friend answered, her voice panicked. "Thomas, where are you?" "Eliza, she went into labor. It was so fast. The ambulance just took her to County General." He drove like a man possessed. The world outside was a blur. All he could see was that thing in the basement. All he could hear was Finch's voice, another link in the chain. He screeched into the hospital parking lot, sprinting through the automatic doors. He found the maternity ward. A doctor was waiting for him, her face grim. "Mr. Vane, your wife is stable. The delivery was remarkable. We've never seen anything like it." She led him to a room. Eliza was lying in a hospital bed, her face ashen, her eyes hollow. She was staring at the wall. She looked empty, used. "The baby?" Thomas whispered, his heart hammering. The doctor forced a smile. "The baby is perfectly healthy. A little small, given the size of your wife's belly, but healthy." She gestured to a clear bassinet in the corner. "We're just running a few final tests. You can hold her." Thomas walked slowly toward the bassinet, his legs feeling like lead. He looked down. It was a baby girl. She had a fine dusting of dark hair. Her skin was pink. She was sleeping peacefully. She looked normal. A wave of relief so powerful it made him dizzy wash over him. Maybe it was over. Maybe the curse was broken. He reached into the bassinet, his hands trembling, and gently picked up his daughter. She was light, lighter than he expected. She stirred in his arms, her tiny face wrinkling. She opened her eyes. They were a deep, dark brown, just like Eliza's. She looked at him, and then her tiny lips curved into a smile. It was not a gummy, innocent baby smile. It was a knowing, cruel, familiar smile. The same smile he had seen in the basement of Ravenwood. The baby made a soft, cooing sound, and then in a tiny, clear, high-pitched voice that was impossibly articulate, she spoke a single word. It was a name he had seen in Finch's file, the name of the legacy she carried. "Mama," the baby whispered. Eliza, from the bed, let out a choked, broken sound. She turned her head slowly and looked at Thomas. Her eyes were filled with terror beyond comprehension. She knew. The curse was not broken. It had simply come home. Thomas stood frozen in that bright, sterile hospital room, holding the thing that was and was not his daughter, the thing that had called Eliza by another woman's name. The legacy of Ravenwood was not a medical file, it was not a haunted building, it was a bloodline, a chain of suffering, passed from mother to daughter forever. Dr. Finch's work endured because the work was now sleeping in Thomas Vane's arms, smiling its old, terrible smile. And somewhere in the deep woods, behind a rusted gate, an empty room at Ravenwood waited for the next empty vessel, the next desperate soul, the next cursed room. The chain is only as strong as its weakest link, and the Vane family had just become its newest.